thing. Welcome everyone to UnderworldParty, and we are here today with Clarissa Gunawan, who is a peer acquaintance, and I really, I really enjoy sort of watching their own progress, and they're going to unpack some of that context that they're in. But I want to say that the theme for this episode and a few of the other episodes that are going to come out around the same time is beyond land acknowledgement. So we're going to be getting into what is land acknowledgement, how do we actually go beyond the kind of corporate guilt speak of like naming land, and get into the real like meat of land offerings, actually being with the land as people, as practitioners, as kin of the land, and just getting beyond the whole Cartesian nonsense that we have, which is the current land acknowledgement, in my opinion. So that's what we're going to get into today, Beyond Land Acknowledgement, Part 1 with Clarissa Gunawan. Clarissa, hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I'm super glad. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while, and I think this is just a really good entryway to talking about it.
Mm.
If you wouldn't mind, sort of like, what's your context?
Mm. Um, I would say I have a really, probably the majority of modern people can resonate with my context, which is I still am holding down a 9 to 5 corporate job, which at the moment I'm in Melbourne, Australia, or the name of the land is Bunwurrung country. Um, and we're in lockdown at the moment. So what that looks like is it's just working from home, doing the corporate thing. But in my spare time, I am also a student at the School of Shamanic Womancraft. And at the moment, I would describe myself as coming home to my Taoist ancestors through Liu Ming, who they're introduced me to, and it has been the biggest blessing of my life. I can say that honestly. He's come to me in dreams. I've never actually met him in waking life, but it is the perfect kind of scenario for meeting this teacher that I've been calling in. And I can't idolize him. I can't. He's not here in physical form, and it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful poetry.
Great. Yeah, I'm right, Liu Ming. So, that's both of our teachers, and I met him once and then he died. Literally, literally
Yeah.
like 2 months after I met him. So that's very real, and we share that kind of study of his transmission, essentially.
Mm.
And of course, maybe I'll do a whole podcast on Liu Ming, and that would be pretty awesome.
Oh yes.
We'll get Aaron, and we'll get everybody on. We'll
Yeah.
get everybody on the podcast to talk about Liu Ming. Um, but I also just giving people more context. So you've got this 9 to 5. What area? Like what area is it? Like what kind of industry?
Mm. So interestingly, it's banking and financial services.
Mhm.
Um, and I was just thinking about how in our Western cosmology, we value so much the material, and the economy is so material and it's about material purchases. But actually, in the banking and financial services industry, a lot of it is so immaterial. There is like the invisible hand of supply and demand. There is, if the market expectations wants the stock to go up, it will go up. There's something like incredibly intangible, even in what we think is material. So yeah, I mean, that's the industry that I'm in. I do risk management, which just means I try to minimize the risks in banking.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. So there's a way in which you're already seeing the animism inherent in these kinds of strangely mutated, you know,
Mm.
places, right? Like this mutated, like banking, oh, this like demon of money, but like on some level, it's like it's all quantum, right? Like there's a spirit of money, there's a spirit of banking, like when you said the
Yeah.
invisible hand, it's like, yeah, okay, that's
Even the way insurance works, it's like you are predicting something. It's a divination of a future event. And Ming says, the two human practices that has been morphed and mutated from are divination and healing.
right,
You're either doing one or two of those things. It's yeah, it's
right.
just
It's basic. Great, cool.
Mm.
And you're also a mom, yeah?
Yes,
Great,
I have two beautiful boys, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. Mm.
great. Right. So that's some great context. And you said you were on the land of the, what was it again?
The Bunwurrung people.
Bunurong, and
Hmm.
that's so-called Melbourne. And
Hmm.
your people are from, am I correct, in Indonesia and beyond? Is that true?
Yeah, so my ancestors are Chinese diaspora that have settled in Indonesia, married into the local Javanese a little bit. So that's my DNA
Yeah,
in my blood. But
yeah,
yeah.
totally. Well, I like it. And I like it because it's real that like we are like sourcing from all these rivers, right? And then there is still a place pre-originating those rivers, which we could call Taoism, but as we both know, there's a pre-Taoism too.
Mm,
And I'm wondering, because you're in the shamanic school of womancraft, I have a sense that that sort of tries to get to that pre-originary place in which like mostly females were what we would call shamans or medicine
mm,
people back before there was organized religions.
mm.
Am I correct in that? Or,
Yeah,
how correct
yeah,
am I in that?
absolutely. So the teaching basically is that before even um, yeah, before organized religion, but way before that, I think the setting is like 7,000, 8,000 years ago. We all lived shamanically, and there's different evidences that show this all over the world. But that the woman was the original shaman because her body was the portal that birthed the other place to this place.
Right,
Mm.
right. Yes, right. And so we have like those caves and womb and then the structures that were built that were in the shape of a vulva and all of the like what even the word like vulva and the Norse kind of shamanic seer that had a staff that was like
Mm.
very close to the word vulva, right? Like so
Mm.
there's something here about like the phallus and the yoni and the cave and the who comes out of the cave and
Mm.
all of that, like from the dark world to the light world and all of that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. So um, I want to get into the sort of the meat of the theme here, which is beyond land acknowledgement, which is where I'm really fascinated to go with like you're in the corporate world and you're in this sort of like modern shamanic world, and you're also trying to rediscover this kind of Taoist,
Mm.
cosmology. So you have these kind of three worlds in your life, and how are you seeing or experiencing land acknowledgements in all of those areas, like in your school of
Mm.
womancraft, but also in your corporate sector with the DEI stuff that
Mm.
everyone's doing?
Yeah. And the DEI stuff, interestingly, in so-called Australia here is so new. It's still so in its infancy that sometimes I think you would look at us down under and think, wow, have they not even spoken about that? It's so new. But yeah, I would say that it reminds me of what I just heard Ming say again, which is about we need to understand our cosmology. A lot of Western people or modern people think we don't have one, that we're modern. So we believe in science or we believe in progress and what this world is the real world. And in the past they were primitive. But in this world that we live in, it's really important to understand that. And that's been the key for me to unpacking it, which is why I'll go on and on about the cosmology, because I didn't know I had a cosmology. I grew up Christian. This is also a really interesting mix in Indonesia, that all of the Chinese Indonesians are Christian. And then the indigenous have also lost but they're majority Muslim. It's like a 95% Islamic country. So there's something in there too with I'm not going to go into that because I haven't analyzed that enough, but
Right.
it's this cosmology of modernity. And what does that mean? And I think to me, what makes sense the most is that it is a Western cosmology, very much foundationally Christian. And I know so much about that. I used to be a worship leader at church. So I've done the whole Bible school thing. I know what it's like to worship at church and feel, that fourth eye vision in the cosmology of the five eyes, like that it is real and everyone has access to it. But the modern cosmology that is important, and Ming calls it, creationism, materialism. But this creationist cosmology, he says, we're speaking in it because we're speaking English. So it's really important to understand that we have a creationist cosmology, and that we're using a creationist cosmology to understand a shamanic cosmology. So there's always going to be, it's going to come close, but then there are some things that can't be translated, like chi,
Right.
or like we call it energy, but it's not a thing like energy is. So it's something that is, for me, really eye-opening. And this understanding that I have, that I translate that when land acknowledgement is done in the corporate world, it's very much still this creationist cosmology is underneath that. So we're still thinking we are the perpetrator. There is a God that looks like a human that's created this world. So now we're saying, oh, I know that you're here now, land, and I acknowledge you, land, because I'm the perpetrator. I'm the character in this English language. I think it's important to start there, because where else do we start? We have to start where we are, right? And the modern cosmology is the one that permeates the world at the moment, for better or for worse. It is the one that a lot of there's a lot of countries want to catch up to the West,
Right.
So we have to acknowledge that there is an unconscious or subconscious belief that is the right one at the moment, or
Right.
so trying to unpack that means just acknowledging it first.
Right. Right. And how do you see land acknowledgement coming from this sort of creationist place?
I think that's where we can feel that it's not quite there. It's kind of trying to translate chi as energy. It's like this, yeah, it's kind of right, but there's something that's not it's not there yet, because it's the beginning, it's like the first of the, yeah, let's see where we are. Like, this is where we are. It's kind of like, to me, looking at your cosmology is like touching the ground and feeling, okay, this is the carpet that I'm on.
Right.
And then the next step is like, okay, what do I actually believe? What do not believe, but like, what is the reality that I'm experiencing, and what is the view that I want to
Right.
agree with? Yeah.
Right. Like really questioning and examining, maybe even interrogating these kinds of like uh, presuppositions in our own language center, right? Like the presupposition in English is subject object, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what English has become, is like there are subjects and then there are non-subjects, which we call objects.
Yeah.
So already we're in a presupposition where our very language and the associations and shared definitions with that language are generally about thingifying, right? Like making beings into things, right?
Yes.
right? And it makes kind of a weird sense that, like, if there was an all-powerful God that was human, like, because we've seen toddlers do this, right? Like, toddlers are very much like able to flip the script very easily, where like either they're talking to a stuffed animal like it's real, and then but then they can turn that into them being like the god of the stuffed animal, and it's just a stuffed animal. You know what I mean? Like, so there is something really interesting about the flexibility of the human psyche to both interrelate very vividly, like oh, everything's alive, and it's like whoa, and then to also just deaden it like quick, like boom. And that's that
Yeah.
object impermanence that children have, where if they don't see something, it doesn't
It does.
exist, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have that in our psyche, and I imagine that that's not necessarily so new, like that was latent in the human being. Like even 8,000 years ago, there was clearly this capacity to sort of dream in different ways, maybe you could say, right? Like to actually
Perceive.
have,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
to perceive like really vastly different dreams that were almost like on top of each other, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, so when land acknowledgement's done in this DEI way, it's very much like a kind of script that we're invoking. We're saying a prayer, but we're not
Yeah.
feeling the prayer,
Yeah.
right? We're saying it, but we're not like really like feeling it. And how does this relate to like both your time as a Christian worship leader? Because I really truly believe there's magic, there's some Kundalini shit happening over there, you know, that's real.
Yeah.
Like I've seen people have the Holy Ghost. I'm like, I know what that's like. You can feel it. It's like a
Yeah.
charge. Um, but then also like in the shamanic womancraft. So tell me a bit more about land acknowledgement from both of these other maybe more sacred, let's just say more sacred areas that you've experienced.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I'll describe the land acknowledgement that we do in the school when we gather, which is, first of all, you put your hands on the ground, you acknowledge where you are, and then you call in the directions, and then we say a little prayer to the direction, and that I see you, and it's associative thinking, which is very similar to very actually the same as Taoist cosmology, which is that the north is the season of the mother, it's peak energy, and then east is the wood, which is the beginning, so that's the maiden energy, so it goes maiden, mother, and then crone, which is west to south. So when you call in the directions, you're also calling in your grandmothers, you're calling in the maidens. So there's this beautiful kind of, it's not just about the direction is one thing. It's also the element of the element of fire, and it's also the season of mother, creativity, the energy of fertility. Right. So I've found that such a beautiful, and again, this is where I think it's the shamanic roots of a lot of wisdom traditions have this commonality, because I see it in Ming's teachings of Taoism and in the five elements in Chinese cosmology, which is a bit different to the four elements in Vedic. But yeah, it's associative. So when you're actually doing the land acknowledgement, you're contextualizing yourself, but it's not about yourself. It's about the time and the space that is meeting at the moment in the currentness of the now. It's like, what is the energy all around me that is my context? The other part, obviously, that we're reclaiming, and I think it's so important, is the bleeding aspect. So we've been taught that women obviously have a menstrual cycle, and that it is such a sacred act to collect your blood and bleed onto the earth and to give it back onto the earth. And this is again a commonality that I've heard in Ming's teachings as well, because he talks about there's a class where he talks about all the shamanic tools. One of them is liquor, actually, which is spirit. And he says, that shamans used to use liquor or spirit, which is like liquor is basically called spirit because you try to take the essence of it out of the drink. And then you give it back into the land as an offering because agriculture, because they understood, the shamans understood that agriculture was such an offense to the land. But we negotiated agriculture with the land so that there could be more humans, there could be more of us.
Right.
So as an offering, so it's almost this deep, like, this is what it means to me at the moment, to be in relationship with the land. It's not just, I acknowledge that you're here. You've always been here. That's kind of the creationist cosmology beginning. And then the next step is, okay, what's the history of this land that I'm on? And why am I offering blood to it? Why am I offering liquor or spirit or milk on top of it? Because it's something that signifies the relationship between us.
Right.
Mm.
Right. I'm curious how you think about that in a transactional or non-transactional way, also being in the banking world. You know what I mean? Well, because there's such a large practice of shamanism, which is essentially like making bargains with spirits, right?
Mm.
Right. And also there's a place beyond that bargaining. Like we know there's a place, and yet we have to acknowledge that agriculture demanded some kind of tithing, like some kind of real payment of debt to the land, right?
Mm.
So, yeah, do you have any thoughts and feelings on that?
I don't. I'm sure that I think, again, it's that cosmology. If I was to do it, and you can see the difference between when someone is doing it transactionally. For example, I've been in many land acknowledgements in the corporate world where they have this script and they can't deviate from it, and they are so uncomfortable saying it, usually white males that are the banking executives. Like, oh, traditional, and today we're going to talk about, like, there's even a difference in, they're so uncomfortable holding that what they don't believe in, but that they know they have to do it. So I would call that transactional.
Okay.
And I'm sure that there are lots of shamanic practitioners that do it that way when they are offering to the land, but it's unexplainable though. I don't know how to, I think Ming says that there's, of all of the isms that he studied, like shamanism is his, he knows that it's true and that he doesn't care that there's like 200 false shamanic practitioners. You will find the one good one. I think it's because it's robust in terms of the teaching and the foundation. Whereas there's, of course, there's going to be a lot of creationist shamans.
Right.
Because they haven't done the work to understand what their view of the world is, which we're never taught that. Like before I listened to Ming, I was like, yeah, we're never taught that there's a view and a method and a fruition. Like, yeah. We just are taught the method and the fruition,
Yeah, right.
results. Like, what is the result? So yeah, it's a big unlocking of the secret for me.
Right. And when you're giving blood or milk or other honey, whatever, like I'm super interested in the experience you're having when you're giving these sacred nutrients to the land in your sort of, in your crafthood, and how that feels. And if it's not transactional, what would you call it?
I would call it, I go into ritual, or it's like a ceremony, because a big part of that whole process is also, for women anyway, not being ashamed of our blood, which has been decades or centuries ingrained into all of us.
That's right.
I have a sister in Jakarta who's very modern, and like, it's funny. She looks at me and she's like, what are you doing? And then she's like, okay, that's fine that you do that, but just please don't put blood on your face. Like, that's what it's this, like, we have such a shame of blood, and like the fact that it's actually this. So that's why I go into ritual and I go into ceremony and I do call the directions, and all of those skills of, it's not just me pouring blood, which is transactional, like it's not, here you go, here's my offering.
Right.
But it's like this, yeah, like a relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what do you feel when you do all that ritual and you're in that, and then the act comes where the blood goes in the ground?
There is I would almost call it, in the five eyes cosmology, it's like when you're doing that and you're in ritual, which is kind of a mini trance, right? It's like you're checking out and you're doing something and you're receiving. I actually receive visions. The other part of my context is I'm an Akashic Records reader in my spare time.
Yeah.
And when the blood goes into the ground, I used to there's a depth, there's almost like a stillness in between the activity that happens. It's like almost like fifth eye glimpse of you can't talk about it, but it's something that is like, yeah, it's nature looking at itself in the, like, I am a piece of nature, and I'm looking at the big nature.
Right. And you get that sort of like direct reflection, which is very hard to quantify with language. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. And like you said, there's a stillness, and that means that time, like you're experiencing time differently.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's also another thing of like understanding about cosmology and how different cosmologies, I think they fundamentally perceive time in a different way.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that like something so fundamental, like as fundamental as gravity, perhaps even more fundamental than gravity, is actually can be perceived differently depending on your view. Right? And
which
how
is
much you,
I was going to say it's bizarre because nobody refutes gravity.
Right.
Right. So I think it's very telling of how limiting the Western cosmology of creationist cosmology can be, because if you believe there was a time called creation, and that was before now, and that was in the beginning, and now we're after that, then time is linear, obviously, because that was before creation. Creation was big creation, everything was created, and then now is like after that, because we're all here. But that is, how do we explain that? Because it's not our actual experience. Like, yeah.
Right. There's some way in which like stories are so powerful that they literally change our sensations. Right? It's like if you tell a kid that time is linear, they will start to experience time as linear, and they will start to have sensations and perceptions that are that sort of fit themselves into that story, right? It's like so, and that means all the other phenomenon or the other textures of their experience that don't fit that cosmology somehow just get like thrown in some weird pile in the dream, right? Like they're just not they're because then they can't assign any labels or words to them, because we don't even have a languaging to describe the sort of texture of time being nonlinear, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And this goes to the banking world as well, as what I said. Like, if the market expects something to happen, it will happen. So there is such a strong power in our expectations and our view. Because like, I remember being a Christian woman and thinking like, oh yeah, I understand this up to a point. I understand why I have to be good and blah 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 blah, and that I do want to go to heaven. But then I did ask all those questions. What are we going to do in heaven forever and ever and ever and ever? Like that's not, like, don't you get bored singing with the angels all the time for all of the time? Like it, and that's just not our experience, like it's not linear, because linearity implies like that when you change a course, you'll stay that the same way. Or like when, I think Ming describes it as you think things are linear. Try being angry at someone and then just wait, because soon you won't be. Or try being really, really happy and then just wait, because soon you won't be. That is our actual experience, like just like gravity is. We don't have to deny it. It's not like, I get into a rage and then the next day I'm like, oh, it's the actual experience.
Right, right. Yeah, and it's interesting that like there must have been a soothing reason why the creationist sort of story was so kind of catchy, right? It's kind of like a pop song you can't stop singing or something, for some people, clearly. So clearly it soothes some kind of existential angst or something, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that like what is happening now with the kind of like return to something, because also what we're saying is that like animism didn't go anywhere. We're saying that like animism and shamanism didn't end. Which, like, because we think like, oh, that was the past and those were the primitives, and now we're here and we're so much smarter, but we can't even figure out how the pyramids were made, so like whatever. So,
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me that like if things just are constantly cycling and they're happening simultaneously, then all of these ways of being are happening now. So that means creation's happening now, right? So that like creation is a kind of creation is not even an event. It's like this idea that events are like these moments that have beginnings and endings. So now we have to think, oh crap. So now when I think of things, I'm thinking that things have a beginning, a middle, and an end, like a good movie, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But we realize that our actual experience of things, like what you're talking about, has no beginning, middle, and end, because you can't find any of them. Ever. You can't ever, like, you can arbitrarily, but this is the catch, right? You can arbitrarily, if you're very stuck in the hook of the story, you can arbitrarily determine beginnings and endings.
Yeah.
But that actually is, I think that's the actual problem with like land acknowledgement, is that you're determining that there was a time when like the animistic landness ended and colonization began.
Yes.
And you're like, wait, no, actually, it's just like you can't. It's like there's something where you start to grind to a weird, like googly place, because the colonists are like, there's beginnings, middle, and ends, and we're here now, and we don't ever want to end, so it's infinite progress forever. And it's this weird like, and we're going to heaven too, and like heaven's this thing that's up there. It's like this weird like, okay, whatever. But when you realize that when you're asking someone to read a land acknowledgement, it's the very first step in sort of fucking with that script.
Yes.
Like beginnings and endings and like my arbitrary measurements. Why is my experience not fitting into my arbitrary story about reality, right? And so the land acknowledgement is like the first baby step, I think, in sort of, maybe decolonizing the imaginary, the colonial imaginary, right? It's like, because colonization is a sort of fantasy story that they're telling, everyone's telling this fucking story about progress and whatever, this fantasy of like betterness, right?
Yeah.
And then we have this sort of eruption of actual equity and actual solidarity, which means listening to other people whose worldviews are actually fundamentally not the same storyline.
Mm.
And yet, we're on the same fucking planet feeling gravity together, right?
Yes.
So you have to start to reconcile that the story you're telling yourself about the world is not the same as the actual world.
Mm.
Right? And then the animistic and shamanistic way to deal with that confusion is not necessarily to dominate the world, but to have this kind of reciprocal ritual relationship with it, right?
Yeah.
Like the seasons are coming and I don't even understand what that means, and the moon is doing this thing and I don't understand, yet I can feel the stability in all those lines of relationship, right? And if I can give my blood or the spirit of the wine or the grapes, back to the earth in this kind of concentrated form, I'm essentially saying thank you to this kind of strange thing that I find myself inside of, right?
And participating in it.
And that's the other thing is that beyond land acknowledgement for me is, can the corporate world as entities, because we even talk about corporate entities.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like how fucking witchy, like how spirit, that's totally spirit craft, right? Like it's like, oh, corporate entities and you just decided they're humans because you wrote it on a piece of paper. I mean, that's straight up, like that's just like bonkers magic, right? It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But can the corporate world in that kind of way start to participate in a way that's not just this kind of like the beyond land acknowledgement for me is what we're talking about here is when the corporate entities actually have to participate in the actual worlding of the world, right?
Yeah.
Instead of just extract, because what we have now is essentially vampires sucking resources from the land, literally extracting precious minerals and water and diamonds and whatever, extracting energy, chi, right? Extracting chi, and then trying to keep it in like this in these partitions, right? Like banking is all about that, right? Like I've extracted chi and now I'm keeping it in this bank account, which is essentially digital zeros and ones in a it's a coded cave.
Yeah.
That I can like hold my golden chi inside of, right? So
which is invisible. It literally is, it's invisible wealth that then you make more money out of invisibleness.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
It is so animist. It's not even funny. It's like, but yes, you're right. I think that's the issue. And that's why I go back to, can you ever go beyond land acknowledgement if you were still so afraid of looking at your own cosmology? Because if you continue to operate within the creationist materialist view, which even your own experience, even in banking, you don't have to be spiritual. You can still be selling products to neurotics and just have the ability to self-reflect. Like, is this money real that I'm banking in there? Like, I'm not even looking at it. It's not material from me. It's not in my wallet. Like, so if they can do that and reflect, then it can go beyond, because it's like we're stuck in a very childish cosmology. It's like the cosmology that you would teach to a child so that they're not afraid.
Right.
And that's why the whole toddler thing makes sense. Like, I have kids of my own, like they get really afraid at things that they don't understand. So you give them a story that there is a beginning, there is a middle, and a happy ending.
Yes. Yeah.
But there's so much that we can do, even just, I let them look at death. Like, a family cat died and we did a ceremony and I let them hold the dead body. Like, it's so important for them to understand that death is part of life. As soon as you're alive, you will be dead. Yes. And you'll be alive again, you'll be dead again. And yeah. So it's the cosmology again for me. It's like such an important, and it doesn't even have to be, Ming says in his Tao Te Ching translation, the Taoist lens is just one lens of understanding the reality of what we're in. There's so many other lenses that you can apply, And for me, that's why shamanism is so robust, because we know that it was practiced all over the world, not just in China or Central Asia.
Right. Right.
Mm.
Right. And I really am with you there because, it's like shamanism is now a catchphrase that isn't necessarily even the thing that is the practice, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, like, we have to touch on that, like, shamanism in the 70s and the 60s and 70s was sort of co-opted by what's his name, white guy, and
Yeah.
everybody's, shamanism, this, that. And obviously shamanism is a kind of word for a practitioner practicing these kinds of things that was from, ancient Siberia, not even that ancient, just not just pre-modern, just not
Yeah.
rationalism. And, and we have this kind of animistic, shamanistic, witchcraftian human practice. So again, we if we think we're other than that, we already are in a weird cosmology.
Mm.
Because when did animism end? It didn't. When
Didn't.
did witchcraft end? It's like people go, well, there were all these witch trials, and it ended because the Spanish Inquisition. It's like that's impossible. Like there's just a kind of that's just a narrative war. That's like a culture war where you can kind of corrupt a person's narrative and get them to be subservient to you. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
what that is. It's like a cosmological narrative battle. It's like whose story is gonna be stronger, like the winners write the history books. Well, it's not that you really won anything, it's just that you oppressed people and then you just made a story about it. That was really
Mm.
nice. And I think we
Yeah.
have to understand that, like, even that is a kind of shamanism because the
Mm.
ancient shamans were trying to tell stories that got the rain to fall,
Mm.
or tell stories that got the fish to return because they were hungry. So even baked into the human experience was this kind of like, well, can I tell the story that brings the food? Can I tell the story that lets
Mm.
the baby be born and not die when they're born? Like it's very
Mm-hmm.
real that, like, singing is a story and you sing and then the vibrations help the mother give birth, right? It's like it's
Yeah.
real. It's like it's not like we've taken language and even objectified language when language itself is this kind of like, well, what do you want to do? It's like
Mm-hmm.
very open, right? Like language is very open. It's an open
Mm.
system, which again is why shamanism is so robust because it's also an open system.
Yes.
It's not closed
Mm.
because if you experience something, you can relate with it. Therefore, you can actually, like, either get it to be on your side or get it to
Mm.
leave you alone, or like whatever you are trying to do or whatever
Mm.
you decide is, what you want to try. And that the thing about these cosmologies too is that, like, capitalism and Christianity and creationist stories, they try to be closed systems.
Mm.
And it's
Yeah.
like, at some level, you have to open up all closed systems and return to something that is actually so robust that it can hold all your contradictions
Yes.
and all your
Exactly.
paradoxes
Yep.
and all your confusion and all your I don't know and all your, like, but how can that and that be true at the same time? It has to be able to hold all of that and still.
Yes.
And the nice thing about it is that, like, the reason that it works is because if it didn't, we could just turn off gravity with our freaking story.
Yes,
But we
exactly.
can't. But we
Yeah.
can't. So,
So there is a reality that is just reality. That is not like part of a tradition or a belief system, or just like gravity. As you said that, I was just thinking about how can what I love so much about the Taoism um, that Ming teaches is it makes me be able to see that, and that's what all humans should be able to see, because in the tradition of the five eyes that he talks about, for example, there's a fourth eye that is our vision eye. You know, this is where all the great religions, like usually just one or two men, receive this, you know, open their fourth eye and they receive the vision and the story. To say that it's real or not real is like just a stupid question, because they receive the vision. But the thing is, what tends to happen in our creationist cosmology world is when you know, the Chinese term for it is that there's a sea of wisdom when you have your fourth eye open. And everyone has access to the sea of wisdom, everyone, because we are nature. We're like a chunk of nature, Tao itself. So we can look at the Tao whenever we want to. So, but the problem is that when some people access the sea of wisdom in the way that they did, they then preach, because we exist in a salvational cosmology, they then preach that that is the only way to access the sea of wisdom. So I've actually learned how to read the Akashic records from a woman who preaches that it is the Pleiadians that are the gatekeepers to the records. And I shit you not though, Dare, like I had a reading from her and it was the most beautiful, like, of course I believed in it straight away, because and then I went into this weird, like, do I believe in the Pleiadians? I've never thought I was a star seed. I'm becoming like the, it's because she accessed the sea of wisdom in that way. Of course it's real, but that's not how I access the sea of wisdom. But that's the beauty about having an open system, is it explains that when in your moment of death, when you die and you go into the second transitory state, which is the fourth eye, like it's a bit flipped, but yeah. That is the vision that you'll see. So if you're a Christian and you know, a really devout Christian or Catholic, in your moment of death, Ming talks about his grandmother. She had a complete death experience because she believed in that she saw Jesus and the Virgin Mary in the second transitory state. And this woman that I learned the Akashic records from, she will see the Pleiadians. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, totally.
So yeah, so that kind of made me, like, that is the reality of my experience. Is I see all of these people, they are doing real work with real fruition, but it doesn't have to be one way. It never is. Like that's just
Right.
the truth, right?
Right. I mean, it fascinates me because it's like this to me feels like the to be continued part with this series, is that, like, and I've loved that you've like broken it open like this, because it's like there are an infinite number of pathways to this place that is the origin of all these pathways. And it's like, it's interesting that we, as little human chunks of Tao, are like so hell-bent on like propping up the path. Like it's like we get attached to the delivery mechanism of the food, but not the food itself. It's like,
Yeah.
so it's like I got given this great gift, but now I'm preaching about the only way to get that gift is these steps that I was given because that's how I did it.
Yeah.
Versus, I call it like the burning boat thing, which is like all my beliefs, all my opinions, all my experiences, all my ideas are like burning boats that just get me to the other side. You know, it's like I'm on this fucking sea going from island to island, and that's a lifetime, right? Or whatever. You can, it's whatever time you want it to be. But the boat, like the boat's burning and sinking, and just as I reach the other shore, it's fucking under, it's gone.
Yeah.
But what I see everyone doing, and of course I've had this experience myself, is like trying to save the boat. Because you think that the boat's gonna like get you rich or something, like, oh, I need this boat, or if else people won't believe me, or like, oh my god. But really it's like, but it got you to where you need to go, so like who gives a shit?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that we're living in this world where like everyone's just constantly like protecting these boats that are constantly on fire. Because the universe is essentially saying, yo, it's like, I don't care, like, you can just get another boat. Just there's a million boats. Just there's a boat every second,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they're all on fire, and it's like a kind of Mario game where you're like jumping from cliff, and they're just falling off behind you, and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like you're just like.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that we have sort of internalized a cosmology where the vehicle is the destination, and that's not true.
Mm. The medium is the message, is
Yeah,
like
all of that
the,
stuff, right?
yeah.
Like all of
Yeah.
that stuff. And it's like, and it's interesting that like that probably has a deep reflective, like the sea of wisdom reflecting
Hmm.
itself. It's like the dream is dreaming the dream, and we're in this
Yeah.
hall of mirrors, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
am I seeing you, or am I seeing a reflection of you? Am I seeing a reflection of
Yeah.
myself? It's like, I don't fucking know. Like what? Like I had this
Yeah.
experience a lot when I was a kid, and I'm sure many people have, of like really being like, how do I know that I'm alive right now?
Mm.
Like, how do I know that my experience isn't happening in a comatose state somewhere? Like how do I like if you ask that question, the answer you get is I don't fucking know.
Yeah. It's
Like I
like
could
their
already
butterfly dream.
yeah, I could be dead, or I could be like I could be a holographic, I could be an AI program in the future. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, and if you're in an animistic cosmology, all of it's valid. And it doesn't even
Hmm.
matter because everything's alive. Electrons are alive and protons and carbon. So like who gives a shit?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that's the other thing too, is like if I am a hologram, who cares? Because it's all burning boats. It's just like, oh yeah, I'm just going here. Oh, now I'm over there. Now the quantum
Mm.
entanglement is happening. So, and the funny thing about gravity is that like we can believe we're from the Pleiades system, but we're still like having real consequences right now.
Hmm. Yeah.
So for me, it's like going beyond land acknowledgement is recognizing that the stories we tell have impacts. So if you tell a
Hmm.
creationist story, you're going to have creationist problems.
Yeah. Definitely.
And you have to somehow recognize that, like, you can play with that whole thing of like story crafting and whatever. You can play with that to actually create better impacts.
Mm.
Right? You can go beyond land acknowledgement because land acknowledgement is essentially the first chapter of a new mythology, right?
Yeah.
But then what's the second chapter?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Exactly.
And of course, just like we read a story, we let go of the first chapter and we go to the second chapter. We let go, we go, okay, that happened and now it's over here. But then understanding too, it's like we go on this journey, and probably at the end of the journey, we realize we never really began and we never really ended.
Mm. Yes,
And that's that
exactly.
non-dual thing where like you and I both enjoy Ming because Ming is able to talk so clearly about the actual experience that we're all actually having, and
Mm.
most of the time we just try to forget about it.
Yes.
It's like,
Yeah.
I don't want to go there, but I find that that's the death practice for me, is recognizing that as I die, all of my stories, beliefs, all of my reasons and justifications, all of my traumas, all of my memories, they will fucking start to dismantle themselves.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
all of my reasons for my identity, the things that I like, the things that I don't like, they will start to fucking like warp and mutate and compost. And then
Yeah.
you are left with only that felt sense that is that fifth eye, right?
Hmm.
Because in
Exactly.
the fifth eye, you don't need words to navigate.
No. Yeah.
And that's the
Or a
thing,
body,
right?
or
Right,
yeah. And
right.
you don't want to bite down so hard in attachment to those things that you were saying that will be dismantled anyway, because that's what gets you to the hell realm. If you're biting down so hard, like, yeah. So let's not bite down so hard.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. Well, this has been a wonderful talk. Is there anything you'd like to say to close our little conversation today for all the people that are listening to this in the future?
I know.
Okay. Well, blessings to you and all your relations. Thank you, everyone, for listening. All the pertinent information will be lifted in the show notes. Thank you so much, Clarissa. This has been a great talk. I just love it. I just love talking to you.
Me
It's been a
too.
while. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Great.